So, Dark Phoenix is the last stand for Fox's X-Men series, as it turns out, both literally and metaphorically. You know, it's sad. I wasn't on board with all the bashing this movie got leading up to its release, so it was disappointing walking out of it and thinking, yeah, that was fine. It's fine, I guess. But definitely not a worthy send-off like Logan or, hell, Days of Future Past. This isn't X-Men's Endgame, unfortunately. Whew, I can't wait for the comments telling me I'm an MCU or Disney shill now. So, I thought I'd put together a bunch of quick fixes that could enhance this movie somewhat, since I don't have a life. Not a complete rewrite, because that wouldn't be a quick fix. No, if I was going to try and do a comic-accurate adaptation of the Dark Phoenix, I'd probably have it be an entire trilogy of films all on its own. So, let's quickly run through some stuff to try and make Dark Phoenix a better finale for Fox's X-Men saga. Note, not trying to diss Simon Kinberg here. I have the power of hindsight, he did not. I am not a writer, just a guy with too much spare time and who would have probably butchered Dark Phoenix too if I was suddenly thrust into the director's chair. Number 1. Call it X-Men Dark Phoenix. I'm starting off with a nitpick, but just make the official title of the film X-Men Dark Phoenix. I get what the mindset was, they're trying to Logan it up by just calling the film Dark Phoenix, but it's still an X-Men film. Just call it X-Men Dark Phoenix. Internationally it's called that, so just make the official title that. It's the final X-Men film. Put X-Men in the title. Jesus. Number 2. Have them wear the costumes from the end of Apocalypse. Come on, Fox. Just throw the fans this one bone. This is the final X-Men film. Let them be colourful and wacky. 3. Don't put aliens in your movie. Look, I get it. You want to have some fan service put in here. The Dark Phoenix saga turns into a space opera at some point. However, the X-Men film series has been pretty grounded at this point. Days of Future Past is great, don't get me wrong, but they were pushing it already with time travel. You don't introduce aliens in your final film and then also never really deal with the implication that aliens exist. There's a lot to unpack when you decide aliens exist in your universe, and this movie never really deals with that. Also, they're really boring villains, and this is meant to be a story about Jean Grey. Jessica Chastain is wasted in a nothing villain role, and they make the finale be about stopping her. Yes, the comics had aliens, I know, but it was ultimately still a story about Jean Grey and the things she did as the Dark Phoenix. This movie at the end becomes about stopping an alien from using the Phoenix Force for her own agenda. This would be like if in Captain America Civil War, the finale was really about fighting Winter Soldiers and not about the emotional turmoil between Steve, Tony, and Bucky. This movie is supposed to be about Jean Grey, so just make it about Jean Grey. Don't throw aliens in it who ultimately do nothing but pull attention from what the story should be about. And yeah, they're boring villains with poorly defined abilities. Like, I can't tell how invincible they're meant to be, because sometimes enough bullets I'm not even going to get into it. Also, because we're not doing aliens in my version, the Phoenix Force is also not some cosmic force. We already established in Apocalypse that she has the Phoenix powers, so you don't need to add a cosmic force. Like, I know, comic reference, but again, more grounded universe. And I know X-Men movie continuity has never worked, but come on. It was one movie ago, she had the Phoenix powers. At least pretend like you're trying to maintain some form of continuity. Number 4. Dark Phoenix is the villain. So, once you remove the aliens, the focus is entirely on Jean Grey, and that's how it should be. Dark Phoenix is the villain of the Dark Phoenix story. And because one movie is not enough to do all the stuff in the comics, here's my attempt at a simplified way to do it. You yummy it up. In Yu-Gi-Oh!, the character Marek Ishtar suffered from so much abuse and depression in his childhood that he developed an evil split personality. Jean went through a similar thing, developing the Dark Phoenix. I know I'm riffing on Last Stand, but again, trying to maintain some form of continuity here. So Charles suppressed this darker side with mental blocks, and when in space, Jean gets hit by a solar flare or something, and then she has to accidentally unlock her darker side and her full abilities to save herself. Now her dark side is running amok, and it becomes a battle between the two sides of Jean Grey to control her body. Now there's some interesting character stuff there, as opposed to just how the actual movie just sort of makes it like Jean is kind of mentally unstable, but it's not really clear. Through Jean's darker half, we get to see the literal darker side of Jean herself. How deep down a part of her really does want to do these horrific things. We get to see the duality of mankind through her. A good way to show the duality is that a part of Jean is torn up that she killed Mystique, but then the Dark Phoenix kind of relishes in that and tells Jean that no, you enjoyed hurting her. You wanted her dead. You just did what you wanted, and that's good. That kind of thing. Also, have Jean's powers get stronger as the film progresses. It adds tension if she gets stronger every time there's a fight scene with her in it. She struggles at first to fight off the X-Men maybe, but then she progressively gets better at it with each confrontation. Number 5, Magneto's motivation. I get that Raven was like family to Eric. That being said, I think he needs a bit stronger motivation in deciding to kill Jean. So here's my idea. Genosha in my version is not land just given to Eric. I mean, shouldn't he still be a fugitive after Days of Future Past and Apocalypse? Why did the government give him his own piece of land? So Genosha is a secret small village he's built, and he decides Jean has to die not just because Raven died, but because Jean's growing power and trail of destruction is once again creating paranoia for normal humans. And he's concerned that if the government decides to crack down on hunting mutants again, Genosha will be discovered. Yes, Raven's death is a final push he needs, but I think this adds more to Eric in this film, especially since now he and Charles want the same thing. They want to preserve the fragile peace that currently exists between mutants and humans. Number 6, Civil War. This movie at times feels like it wants to be to the X-Men films what Civil War was to the MCU. Except Civil War was a great character piece about vengeance and family, and Dark Phoenix doesn't really put enough focus on the team fracturing it for it to, be anywhere near as good as Civil War. Like in some of the promos for this film, they're like, the X-Men will fall. They don't really, though. Raven is angry at Charles for a little, but then she dies. Hank gets angry at Charles, and he leaves, and then Storm and Cyclops debate for a bit, but nothing happens with that debate. So here's what you do. Hank and Storm think Jean needs to die, so they both ally with Magneto. Cyclops and Nightcrawler stay with Charles, they want to save Jean. Also, Peter stays. He's injured, but not for the whole movie, because wouldn't it suck if this character got barely any lines or screen time in his final movie? Have Storm and Cyclops argue, right? But yeah, and this time she chooses to leave with Hank. This way, it feels more like the X-Men is indeed splintering and falling apart. Also, I think it'd be good if Magneto's henchmen in this film are slightly younger versions of Sabretooth and Toad. It just adds some continuity to a series with pretty terrible continuity. Now this film acts better as a finale and bridge between the prequel series and the original X-Men film. Number 7, Cyclops' salvation. Havoc's death in Apocalypse is pretty bad, if we're being honest. He was one of the last living X-Men from First Class who wasn't one of the primary 3 characters, so it sucks his death got pushed aside in favor of a Quicksilver sequence. An admittedly cool sequence, but it was still a pushed-aside death nonetheless. So instead of having an unconvincing Scott and Jean romance, because we aren't really invested in that because we haven't had enough time with him yet, have Scott's sort of story arc and wanting to save Jean be about him having never properly processed the grief over his brother's death. Because immediately after it happened, they had to fight their way out of a military base and then fight Apocalypse. So he's suppressed his feelings over Havoc's death, and now he may have to kill one of his friends. So he has to confront that, death for the first time ever. This way we get a proper send-off for Havoc, because his death gets explored in this film, and it better helps us empathize with Scott. Because I don't care about Scott and Jean's relationship in this film. It's a case of the movie telling us they're in love, but we never really get to, see it. It also means that at the end, it's much more painful when he realizes Jean does have to die, and that he has to be the one to kill her, because he's finally just come to terms with the death of his brother, and now it's him who has to kill one of his friends. 8. Structure. So most stuff is roughly the same other than the details I've laid out. So here's how it sort of goes down in my version. Charles' faction and Eric's faction fight to reach Jean, because one side wants to save her, one side wants to kill her. Jean defeats Eric, like in the movie, then Dark Phoenix agrees to a psychic duel against Charles, but discovers that the good side of Jean is now being fed to the darker side, and soon the good Jean will cease to exist entirely. Charles loses the psychic battle and finally concedes that Jean has to die because the dark side of her has grown too strong to suppress any further. The military capture the mutants bar Jean, but Psylocke frees them. Oh yeah, Psylocke is in my version. I was so sure Olivia Munn was on the cast list for Dark Phoenix for so long. She walks off in Apocalypse as if she'll show up in a future movie, but, she didn't. So, in my version, she's a mutant for hire who Charles recruits to even the odds, because there's Eric, Beast, Storm, Sabretooth, and Toad. That's 5, then there's Charles, Cyclops, Nightcrawler, Quicksilver, and Psylocke. That's 5. It just evens the teams. They all agree Jean has to die now, and they confront her at some big arena or something. Just basically, Dark Phoenix decides to announce her presence to the world, blah 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 blah, attacks a big football game, or something, I don't know. You know what I mean. All the mutants show up and fight side by side with the military to stop Dark Phoenix. The last remnants of Jean get control long enough to beg Scott to kill her, and he finally concedes. Number 9, bringing the series full circle. Charles doesn't retire. He learns from his mistakes and decides to turn away from the X-Men being in the spotlight, instead to help develop the school further. Hank leaves the X-Men to help mutants on the political front, which matches roughly with where he ends up in the original timeline as seen in X-Men The Last Stand. Also, he decides to be blue all the time and stop using the serum to commemorate Raven. Peter leaves with Magneto at the end for Genosha, deciding to finally tell him that he is Eric's son, because, let's wrap up that storyline since the series is going to end. Storm ultimately decides to go to Genosha too, but tells Xavier she intends to return to his school one day. This just helps make it seem like there were consequences to the team fracturing. So now Scott and Nightcrawler begin training some younger mutants to fill the now empty positions in the X-Men team. And who are these young child recruits? Well, they're Colossus, Iceman, Pyro, and Kitty Pryde. Again, trying to establish some sort of continuity. Oh, and sure, let's just have Psylocke join the X-Men, because why not? Charles and Eric have a final talk before the two part, with Eric explaining that he'll stay out of the picture so long as humanity does, but Jean's actions have been enough to damage the peace again, and a young Robert Kelly puts forth the idea of a Mutant Registration Act, because this film, it's sort of like poetry, they rhyme. And it ends with the X-Men beginning to train the new kids, and for a nice bit of fun, Cyclops goes on a brave solo mission to free some mutants in cage matches like Raven was in Apocalypse, and we don't see his face, but one of the mutants he comes across is a familiar one. We just see his hand and those classic claws, and Cyclops, recognizing this iconic hero from the last movie, gets to react You've got to be kidding me. Or something like that. Get it? Because poetry. And then Jean says the same lines that she did at the end of X2 as we see the Phoenix in the sky. The end. So, there are my sort of quick fixes for Dark Phoenix. There's probably some other stuff here and there I would change, but I don't want this video ballooning out too much, because this is meant to be a quick fixes video, not a complete rewrite. Anyways, hope you all enjoyed. I know Dark Phoenix isn't really relevant anymore. Far From Home is literally right about to come out, like tomorrow. I thought this would be fun anyway. See you guys next time. This is Groovy, signing out.